Tell me your first memories as a child.
First memories? Well, I remember going back to kindergarten. It was called the creche. I was about 4 years old, and my mother was working.
Where was this at? Where?
In Vancouver. And I had to go to the bathroom. So, and the little girl was standing there. She was maybe, I think she was a little older than me, maybe 6 or 7. And she ran into the creche, the building, and she got one of the counselors out. And she started to cry, and the counselor looked at me and said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm having a pee. And the counselor said to me, your mother's going to hear about this when she comes to pick you up tonight. So my mother came to pick me up. They put me in a room. And this counselor said to my mother, get this dirty little pig out of here. Or something like that. I was being expelled out of the creche.
What is a creche?
It's a place where they put little kids for the parents are working, and my mother was working, and my dad was working. So this is daycare. It's a daycare. It's called a creche in Vancouver. They had one here, didn't they, Diana?
Yeah.
What was it called?
I don't remember.
It was called a creche anyway. Anyway, then the next thing as a child I remember was, like I say, when I was in grade 1, I remember my teacher's name was Mrs. Christie. And I just remember the day I started school. I don't remember anything else about that. And then...
Were you a good student?
I'm sorry?
Were you a good student?
Average. I got the strap quite a few times because I was very mischievous.
You misbehaved.
Teasing the girls. Then I remember going into high school. I started making friends. I had buddies, maybe half a dozen guys that I chummed around with, and we all got along good together. I remember my first job was I was on a bike delivering small packages. It was called I can't think of the name right now, but I remember I had the bike for about a week, and I parked it on a curb, and a car came along and crushed it all to pieces.
Do you have other jobs?
Oh yeah, I worked at a drugstore, delivery boy, grocery store, delivery boy.
Where in Vancouver did you live?
In the West End near Stanley Park where the beaches were. We had a nice little house there.
And there was you, Georgie, Jimmy.
Yeah, no, Jimmy wasn't born yet. My youngest brother.
How old were you when he was born?
Well, he was 6 years younger. He'd be 6 years from 77. He'd be 71 now.
So did you, when he was a little guy, you and George did most of the things together? Were you guys buddies?
Yeah, we were close. And then we teased Jimmy a lot. And he didn't like it. But we got along together. Never beat him up.
What were your sleeping arrangements? How many bedrooms?
George and I slept together, and Jimmy slept in his own bedroom, and Mom and Dad had their own bedroom.
How long did you live in that house?
Oh, we moved there in 1939. And we were there 10 years.
Do you remember much about the war, the Second World War during that time?
Yeah, I was in the war. I was in the Navy. HMCS Discovery.
How did
His
you,
Majesty's Canadian ship. Discovery, that was the name of the ship.
did you join the Navy?
I joined in HMCS Discovery in 1942. The base was set on Dead Man's Island, Falls Creek, Broad Inlet, which is a portion of Vancouver. And we took a troop train to Toronto. And I was at HMCS York for my basic training, which was about 30 days. And from there we went down to New York and picked up a convoy and went out on convoy duty, 600 ships going to England.
Why did you enlist?
I was 16 years old, and everybody, most of 16-year-old and 18 years old were enlisting.
Did you have a sense of pride in your country, or?
No, we didn't think about the country. We were just the Navy. We were going to either join the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy. And I liked the ships, so I joined the Navy. Then, made a trip right around the world. You want to know where I was?
Yeah.
From Loch Ewe, Scotland, which was a small town up in northern Scotland. We went around the Shetland Islands, over the northern tip of Scotland. We went into a place called Moray Firth, and a little town called Bethel. I had a tooth pulled out there. The dentist said to me, I said, "How much do I owe you?" He said, "Well, I don't want any money." He says, have you got any cigarettes?" I said, "Would you like a carton of cigarettes?" So I got him. I went back to the ship and brought him back a carton of Sweet Capitals. He gave me a bottle of orange on top of that. From Methil, we went down to the estuary of the Thames River, and we went up to the Thames and docked at Surrey Commercial Docks. From there, we went to.
No, you're not telling me every place to stop.
We went to St. Albert Docks.
So you seen it kind of. So what was your duty on the ship?
I was a wireless operator
Meaning.
in the radio room. From there, we went to Valencia, Spain, which was a neutral port. The Germans hadn't invaded it. And from there, we went to Sri Lanka, which was the island of Colombo, off the tip of India. And from there, we went to Perth, Australia. From Perth, we went to Adelaide, then Melbourne, Australia, and then up to Sydney, Australia.
Oh.
From there, we went to Valparaiso, Chile. My dad had a business, food manufacturing, sauce business. He was making garlic sauce, putting it in jars.
In Vancouver?
No, in Detroit.
In Detroit.
Yeah,
What was he doing when you were growing up? What kind of job did he have?
Taxi driver.
You driving a cab?
Yeah.
What did your mom do?
She was a waitress.
Tell us just about your parents.
Well, my dad worked driving a cab until he met this fella who had some money and would like to go into a business. My dad always had this garlic sauce on his mind, and he had a little plant in Vancouver for a while, and they were both running it, and it was fairly successful. And then my dad decided to go to Detroit because he had a cousin there. And his cousin was a lawyer, prosecuting a lawyer. And George and I hitchhiked to Detroit from Vancouver. And my dad picked us up in Grosse Pointe. And drove us. It was really coming down. The snow was very heavy. And then,
How did your mom and dad meet?
well, my mother was in Jasper at the time with Jimmy, my youngest brother, and she wasn't working. But Jim, my brother, was a chef at his uncle's hotel.
Oh, I'm not following. How could she be with Jimmy? She already had Jimmy. Your parents were already married by then. How did Grandma and Grandpa meet initially?
They met in Banff, Alberta. My dad was a musician when he was young, and he learned to play two instruments, the violin and the saxophone. And he formed a group of musicians in New York, and they went on tour. There was 6 of them. And he had a drummer, a saxophone player, my dad played the violin, and a clarinet player,
What kind of music
and
did
a
you
trumpet.
play?
Mostly for movies that were starting out. Like the first movie with sound was the Jolson story.
So they played the background.
Yeah, they fill in for the background. He played some music halls. Never hit Carnegie Hall, but they played in theaters in New York when this was just a little before the sound came in. And then they went on tour, and from what my dad tells me, they played in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, and from there they came up into Winnipeg. And from Winnipeg they played Moose Jaw, Swift Current, Regina, and these are small theaters in these smaller towns.
Is that what was he working in this band when he met Grandma?
No, they from I think Swift Current. They went to Banff, Alberta, and my mother was working for her uncle as a waitress, and he owned the hotel, the Cascade Hotel there. And my mother took her sister and went to the theater, the Lex Theater in Banff, which is still there today. And my mother was sitting in the front row, and my dad was teasing her with the bow. You know, he was hitting her on the nose, and she didn't like it. So they moved back a few seats, and then my dad, after the picture was being finished in the theater, my dad followed her up the aisle and met her outside in front and said, "Can I take you out for a soda?" So they went and had a soda. My mother said he was good looking and attractive, and the fact that he was conducting the band. So that's how my dad met my mother.
Do you know anything about their courtship?
Yeah, my dad told my mother that they were going down to, the next town they were hitting was Vancouver, the Orpheum Theatre in Vancouver. So my dad phoned my mother, or sent her a wire or something, and asked her to come down to Vancouver. So she did. She brought her sister and came as a chaperone. And they got married in Vancouver.
They didn't know each other very long.
2 weeks.
They got married after 2 weeks.
Yeah.
How old were they?
My dad would be 28 and my mother would be 17.
She was a lot younger.
Yeah, a lot younger. Yeah, there was 11 years difference between my mom and dad. Then I was born a year later. Well, let's see, they got married in August and I was born the following June. And that's all I know about my mom and dad. As far as we grew up, I lived with my mother and dad till 1949. Is when we left to go to Detroit. My brother George and I hitchhiked to Detroit. Anyway,
was Grandma and Grandpa, were they good parents?
Yeah,
what kind
they were
of
good.
woman was your mom? Your mother?
I didn't get along too good with my mom, but
Why?
little arguments, and I was kind of bad in a way. I was mischievous. I never got in any police trouble or anything, but
This is from a teenager on, you think?
yeah. My mother and I were very good friends when I grew up, when I was in my 30s and 40s.
And how about your father?
I got along good with my dad. Yeah, he was easygoing. He wasn't mean or anything. He used to give us a strap once in a while. But that was for something really bad.
So, from Detroit, how long did you stay in Detroit?
I moved over to the family. My mom and dad moved from Detroit. My dad's cousin, his name was Rogers, Theodore Rogers. He was a assistant district attorney to prosecutor, and we didn't like Detroit. My dad's business was still in Detroit, but he moved over and we rented a house in Windsor, Ontario, right across the river. From there I went to a college called Assumption College, which was a Catholic college, for 2 years, and I was driving a cab. From there, I moved, myself and George. We went up to Toronto. This is where I met your mother. You want to know the details?
Oh, well, yeah.
Your mother and I went to the Masonic Temple one night. George together.
Oh, okay. You just went to a dance there?
Yeah. And I met your mother.
Where was that at? Scarborough? Or
No, that was in right off Yonge Street in Toronto.
How old were you?
Oh, I'd be about 27, 28. Then, when I met your mom, I asked her for a dance. And I remember when she was wearing a black skirt and a black blouse, silk blouse. Very, very attractive. So I walked up to her and I said, would you like this dance? And she said yes. So we had a dance, and then intermission came, and we went out to a local pub and had a drink across the street. And I drove her home. From there I had a car, drove her home, and we stopped at a little restaurant 2 blocks away from where she lived. And I remember we had a chicken sandwich. And I asked her if I could see her the next day, and she said yes. And I drove her home, and she got out of the car, and we said goodnight. That was it. I picked her up the next afternoon, and we drove to Hamilton, 30 miles away. And it was a Sunday. And then I asked her if she'd like to go out to a movie the next night. She said yes. So we went to a movie the next night. And then we started seeing each other.
What'd you like about it?
Very attractive and very nice. She agreed with what I agreed upon, like going for drives, which you would never do today. And we just got along together. And I fell in love with her, and she fell in love with me, I guess.
So she got pregnant.
Yeah.
How soon after you were dating?
Oh, it was at least a year and a half.
You've been dating for a year and then she got pregnant?
We weren't doing anything for about a year.
What do you mean? Meaning you dated for a year?
Yeah.
And then she got pregnant?
Yeah.
So you didn't ask her to marry you anytime before that year?
Well, I think I did, yeah. And she
Did you?
didn't want to get married.
Why didn't she want to marry you?
Well, she liked her job, and she wanted to be independent.
All right. But before that, now when you were in Toronto, you had a hit and run problem. What happened there?
Well, the motorcycle.
Yeah.
Well, that was we were in Wasago Beach. We were
still dating at the time.
Yeah. We were seeing each other practically every day. And she was going around with George Buchan.
That was his name? The other guy's name?
Yeah. He was a good looking guy, smoked a pipe, young fella, real good looking, better looking than me. And she was seeing him too, on the side. So now she becomes pregnant. And her mother and dad, of course.
This is the motorcycle?
This is the motorcycle thing. The story was, we went up to Wasaga Beach on a Sunday. It was a holiday. And you want to hear the story?
Oh yeah.
We were coming back from Wasaga Beach, and it was just torrential rain coming down. It was just pouring. You could hardly. The windshield wipers wasn't wiping they weren't working. They were working, but they weren't taking the rain off the windshield. So I'm coming down this hill, and I see these. They look like motorcycles, single headlights.
In your lane, or coming the other way?
No, it was a 2-lane. They were in the right lane, and I was in my right lane, and I was going. I had to slow down at about 20 miles an hour. And I had about 5 motorcycles pass me. Zoom, they were going really fast. They were going by, and the highway was really slick with rain. So all of a sudden, your mother and I are sitting, driving, going in a straight line.
Hello?
Then one of the motorcycles, I noticed, you can see sparks coming up off the highway. He was still in his lane, but as I passed him, he came over into my lane and I hit him. So I stopped the car, I ran down, and other motorcycles were stopping. And I ran over to where the body was laying. He was dead. Apparently my front tire went over his head. And this guy said, "That's my brother. Did you hit him?" So I didn't say a word. I just ran back to the car. I jumped to the car, started the motor was running, and we drove down to a town called Barrie, Ontario. I found the provincial police office. I went in there, and I said, there was nobody there, and I said, "Is there anybody here?" And nobody answered. So we waited about 5 minutes, and that's all. Nobody came, so I kind of panicked. And we both got in the car, and we drove back to Toronto. I felt guilty about the fact that I'd killed somebody with my car. So I contacted a lawyer. The lawyer said, "Well, you should give yourself in." So I gave myself in to the lawyer, and we went up to Barrie. We drove, both of us went up to Barrie, and we saw the magistrate that I was to come in front of. And the magistrate said, "Let me check with the police." The police, they told me, and they told the magistrate, because the police came into the judge's chambers, "We're not charging you with anything but hit and run. If you'd have stayed there and waited for the police to come in the office, there would have been no charge." They went out to the scene of the accident, and they saw the skid marks into my lane, which showed, that I hadn't hit him, he did me.
What did they determine happened to him? How did the motorcycle, what happened to him? You saw
He lost control and started on the wet wet pavement and slid over into my car as he was passing.
Was it? Did you hit him in the front of with your bumper? Or?
Yeah, my front bumper hit him.
You fell and you went over.
And there was no skid marks on my side of the road until he come in and hit me.
Was there damage to your vehicle?
Just a little tiny piece came off the chrome.
What were you driving?
A brand new 50 Ford, two-door. Anyway, the magistrate assured me that I would get 30 days in the Barrie County Jail, that they weren't going to charge me with manslaughter or anything. Anyway, that's the end of that story.
So did you serve your time?
Yeah.
30 days?
I went up to Barrie and served 30 days there.
What was that time like in jail?
I was the cook, and I had my own special cell away from all the other guys. They treated me really good. In fact, the warden said, "This is your last day, Al. Would you cut my grass for me outside the wall?" There's a wall around it. So I cut the grass for him, and he invited me and had dinner with his daughter and his wife. And then Rita came up at 12 midnight. I had to stay in, by the rules and regulations of the prison, I had to stay in till 8 o'clock in the morning was release time. So I asked him if Rita had my car by then. She was driving my car. I said, "Can my girlfriend come up and take me at 12 midnight? Because, it's the next day." He says, "Well, we don't generally do that, but if you come up and you go right home, if your girlfriend comes up and drives you right home, we'll let you." You remember that, Rita?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I got out at 12. Rita met me, and I think I stayed at your house that night.
Probably.
And that was the Wasaga Beach episode.
Well, you were pursuing Mom,
Yeah.
and she got pregnant.
Is that what I'm supposed to say?
No. So, did her pregnancy have anything to do with why she took off west?
Yeah, her mother and dad didn't want her in town.
What did Grandma and Grandpa think of you
They were mad.
before that?
They liked me.
Did they like you?
Oh, yeah.
But then she got pregnant, and what happened?
Well, then I went over to see them in their house. I tried to explain to them, what happened, normal. And they didn't understand. They just didn't understand it. So anyway, Diana went to stay with her aunt, Bobby. And I was in Edmonton at the time. My brother just got killed. And went to the funeral. And then I got on the plane the next day, and the train. No, I took a Greyhound bus to Buffalo, New York. And I got a job there in the shoe department in a store. And I visited your mother.
She was there for her whole pregnancy?
She what?
Was she in Buffalo for her whole pregnancy?
No.
Just after baby?
From there, they shipped her off to Syracuse, New York, to stay with her Aunt Eva.
How many months along was she?
And Bibron.
How many months along was she?
Oh, she's getting fairly close, about 7 months. And she stayed with her Aunt Eva for about a month. And then she came back to Toronto and went in the Scarborough, sort of a nursing home. And I drove back. I was living in Hamilton. So then, after she had the baby at Scarborough General Hospital, she put the baby in a care center. And
was there intention to keep it? Was there intention to keep it?
No, she wanted to adopt it out. So I talked her out of that. And then I had a showdown with Rita about taking the baby myself. So I moved from, I took the baby on the train. We came to Calgary.
How did you get possession of Diana?
She just signed her over to me.
Okay.
She was still going with George Buchan. And I guess they had a showdown, and he didn't want to marry her. Didn't want to get married. So she signed the baby over to me. I took the train and came to Calgary. My mother met me with my dad and my aunt, Teresa, at the station.
And you're basically saying that's it for mom.
Yeah, I said goodbye to her. In fact, she wrote me a letter and I didn't even answer it. And I was working at the General Hospital in the lab as a technician.
Who's looking after Diana?
My mother. My mother was living with her in a house with her sister, Teresa. And then I got a job at the hospital, and about a month later, about 2 months later, Rita phoned me. She wrote me another letter. So my mother got after me. She said, "You should answer that letter." I wasn't going to.
What did the letter say?
She had changed her mind, and so your mother wrote me the second time. And my mother got after me. She said, "You should answer that letter." She kept bugging me. You answer her. You write her. Did you write to her? And I said, "No." And she kept bugging me, but I did. So I finally wrote her. And then I phoned her and I said, "I have a priest that'll marry us in the church." So I was Father Swift. So your mother got on a plane. She told me when she was coming to Calgary. She came to Calgary, and we were married. We had a mass, and a nuptial mass, as they call it, and we got married.
Happy day for you?
Yeah.
You got the girl of your dreams back.
Yeah. And I think it was all because of Diana, though.
Was she reluctant, or did she give herself to you then?
Oh, yeah, she did. Yeah. No, she wasn't reluctant. And I had an apartment, I picked up this apartment in Mount Royal. Nice, beautiful home. We had the top floor, third floor. And we had a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom, all in one. So we went, my mother and my Aunt Teresa looked after Diana while we were getting married, right across the street from the church. And my mom and dad and Rita and I went out and had dinner that night. And moved into the apartment together.
Tell me about, just backtrack a bit, tell me about Jimmy's death.
Well, Jim was driving my mother. They were coming from Edmonton to Jasper, which is about 250-mile drive.
What were they doing in Edmonton?
Visiting. And no, it wasn't Jimmy, it was George, my brother. And I was in Edmonton at the time. My dad phoned and he said, George and Mom had a bad accident. They went into a skid on the ice. It was all icy. And they went into a skid and went over a cliff. 50-foot cliff. George lost control of the car, and my brother George broke his neck. He was in a body cast here up. And my mother was badly injured too, but they both survived. My brother Jim had an accident just about 2 months before that, where he was killed.
What happened in that situation?
5 guys young kids stole a truck, Wetaskiwin, about 100 miles away from Jasper. And it was a 5-ton dump truck, and they ran out of gas going into Jasper, 5 miles out of Jasper, and just left the truck sitting in the middle of the road. A lady coming from Jasper saw Jimmy coming down the highway, doing about 60 miles an hour, and she parked right alongside the truck, which was in the middle of the highway, and she put her high beams on, which blinded my brother, and there was no braking or anything, he just went right into the truck.
Why did she stop beside the truck?
Pardon?
Why did she stop? She stopped?
She wanted to light up the way with Jimmy coming at her. She thought all she did was blind him by putting her high beam on. She thought by putting her high beam on, he would see the truck, but he didn't. So he died. That happened on a Sunday night. He died on Tuesday. He didn't have a mark on his body, but he had whiplash so extreme that it just snapped his cord. So I think his spinal cord was hanging by a thread. Anyway, he passed away. It was very sad.
You close to him at any point?
Yeah, well, I hadn't seen him he was in Detroit with us, but I hadn't seen him for about a year. It was very sad.
All right, so back to you and Mom. So then you, where did you go to work after?
I was working at the General Hospital, and I got a job with, I was with XLB for a while. Then I got a job with Moore.
Well, you just jumped 20 years here. You just jumped 15 years here.
Well,
did you go to work you went to work at the airport, at the diner?
Yeah. George and I had a job at the airport.
How did you get into the cabaret business?
No, George and I were working for Harris Sky Rooms, which was a dining room and a cabaret. And this Cliff Harris, who was kind of goofy, he was saving coins and buying paintings and that. And he made me his manager. He gave me his office on the first floor. It was a beautiful place, 3 stories, banquet rooms, cabaret, dining and dancing. So George and I were sitting there one night, and Cliff says to me, I got a business you could go into. It's called the 709 Club. It's on First Street Southeast, and you could probably make a good deal with the fellow that owns it. So this Johnny, the owner, I met with him, and he told me that he couldn't get a cabaret license. That's for dancing. He only get a restaurant license. They wouldn't give him a cabaret license.
Why?
Because he had a criminal charge against him in Alaska. He was an American he was originally from Great Falls, Montana. So I met with him, and he explained the whole thing to me. He says, if you can get a cabaret license from Ottawa through the RCMP, this would be a good thing for you, and I'll only charge you $500 a month rent. No, pardon me, $500 a month was the rent, and give him $600 a month, and he'd be happy with that. So I took it over, and I applied for a cabaret license. It took 2 weeks for it to come from Ottawa. Because they gave me a license for a cabaret, so I had dining and dancing.
Your previous criminal record had no effect?
No, I never had any offense. And so I opened up the cabaret, and I ran it for 7 years. We made a lot of money there. We charged $1.50 admission, and we served food, steaks and ribs, salad, and the spare ribs were my main course. Everybody came for the spare ribs. Then,
no liquor license though?
No, there was no liquor license at all in Calgary at the time. Just beer parlors, that's all you could drink.
How did you get into problems? How did you get into trouble?
Well, we had a lot of disputes in the cabaret with the customers. We had it got out of hand. I was letting in too much riffraff, and they were drinking and bringing their own bottles, pouring their own drinks in the cabaret, and the police were aware of it. And they said, "You've had too many fights in there. There's been knifings in Calgary here in cabarets, and they don't shut them down." But because I was the only cabaret in town, and because of all these fights we had in there, they took me to city council, and I met a judge.
Hold on. How did you get into trouble?
Well, we had a lot of disputes in the cabaret with the customers. We had it got out of hand. I was letting in too much riffraff, and they were drinking and bringing their own bottles and pouring their own drinks in the cabaret, and the police were aware of it. And they said, "You've had too many fights in there. There's been knifings in Calgary here in cabarets, and they don't shut them down." But because I was the only cabaret in town, and because of all these fights we had in there, they took me to city council, and I met a judge.
Hold on.
Where were we now? Oh, we're in the cellar.
Right, so you had riffraff coming in there. A lot of fights?
Maybe two every month.
All out brawls or just...
Oh, they tore the place apart.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. Chairs going flying, tables went flying, everything.
You have any knifings?
No.
Police were called during those?
Yeah, they came.
Did you have policemen coming there and hanging out?
Yeah, they hung around there quite a bit. But they were on the hooch for free ribs. In fact, the traffic department, which was a block away, told me I wanted to order a dozen whips. They don't pay for anything. So it cost me a few dollars once in a while. Yeah. Anyway, you remember Webster McDonald?
Yeah.
Our friend who used to play tennis with it, the big criminal lawyer. And we went out to Gleason one day to see the Indian tribes there. We went to a council meeting out there. He was looking after Indians affairs for Alberta at the time. He and I decided we wouldn't come home for dinner. We'd go and have a nice dinner in a nice, I think we went to the Sheraton Hotel. So we went in there, we're sitting down, and he waves to this elderly man. And I said, "Who's that, Webster?" He said, "Oh, that's Chief Justice for the Supreme Court of Alberta." So I said, "Is he still practicing his law?" "Oh, yeah." So anyway, when City Council, I lost my case to the City Council.
Who are you to hear?
Webster. He acted for me, and we lost to the City Hall, and they ordered me to close down in 6 months. So we took it to the Supreme Court, and it just happened that Jimmy Melvain was my judge. So he went in my favor. He says, "Oh, I can't see taking a man's business away from him. How many children do you have, Mr. Sarantis?" I said, 5. "And you married?" "Yes, I'm married." "Where are you living?" I says, "We're living in a rented house now in Calgary." He said, "Well, I'm going to give you an extra 6 months before I'll get an injunction against the city and give you another 6 months." So I had a year to stay open. But he gave me a date I had to close, which was a year later. So we closed it down. And before we closed down, Webster McDonald phoned me. He had put an application in for me to get a charter license for the Greek Club. So he phoned me up one day and he says, Al, I got good news. He says, I know it's been 2 years since we applied, but I've got a license, I've got a charter license for you. So I had to go around and get 12 signatures from different Greeks that were in business. And I found a place on 17th Avenue that would be just ideal. It was about, I'd say 5,000 square foot size. And I spread the word amongst the Greek community that I was opening up a Greek club for a nice place for you to come down and play cards, and we'll get some pool tables. It'll be like a social club.
Private though.
Yeah, it's private. The only members only, and yet you didn't have to be Greek. I mean, you could be any race because we're not religious here. So I opened up the Canadian Greek Club with the charter. I put the charter. It was in a, what do you call it? Frame. Put it on the wall, and I had my office there. And anyway, we had about 1,000 members.
Wow.
That would be about half the Greek community in Calgary at the time. Then there was a detective. He didn't like us playing cards down there because we had a rake off just like they have in Vegas. His name was Pork Chops. His name was Boyd Anderson. Dwight was his best man at his wedding, our neighbor. And he came down one night with 5 or 6 detectives. He's going to raid the place. I says, you can't raid us. I said, this is a private club. I says, you got no business being in here. Did I invite you? And he got mad at me and he smacked me. You know, he gave me a bang across the face. He was mean. And they had a little joke about him. He had a partner and they called him Applesauce. Pork Chops and Applesauce. Anyway, he tried to close me down.
Under what pretense?
Rake off. You're taking a rake off here. And I said, well, this is private. I says, you got nothing to do with this. It's a private club with a charter. But you couldn't talk to him, boy. And he was, you know, he tried to go above the law all the time.
You were entitled to a rake?
Yeah. Because we were buying food for the place, and we weren't charging for it. You could have a hamburger, or you could have Greek food. Like I used to have these Greek women cook pastries and things, and bring them down, and that was all free. So we didn't charge for any of that. The Canadian government offered me $100,000. Trudeau was the prime minister. They offered me $100,000 to better the club for books and recreation purposes. We wanted to form our football club or baseball, you know. And it was in the making. It was in the making, but we had to close down. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I took a partner in with me.
What's his name?
Basil O'Connor. He wasn't a Greek, but that wasn't important. And I went with your mother to Toronto, and he phoned me the same night we just got there. He said, Al, there's a padlock on the door. A big one, a great big padlock on the door. And there's a note beside it saying, as of this day, you are hereby suspended from operating this club by order of the police department. So I went, I got on the plane the next day. I left Mom in Toronto and I came back to Calgary. Basil met me at the airport with another fella, and we went down the club, and I see this big padlock there with this sign. So I went upstairs and there's a hardware store, I got a hammer. So I pounded and pounded and pounded. It took me about half an hour to get this padlock off. Then I phoned the police department and I says, I'd like to see 2 detectives. They came over. I said, did you people put this note on my door? That was the door that the padlock was on. He said, no, we know nothing about that. So I thought it was Boyd fooling around, you know. Anyway, I went upstairs the next day to have a coffee at the little restaurant that was up there. And I'm sitting with a Greek fella, because there was quite a few Greeks. They were waiting for me to open up to come down. And there was a fella there, his name was Christopher. And we're sitting there, and he acted as if nothing had happened. And then he said to me, he put the padlock on the door. I says, what did you do that for? Well, we don't want you to, there's a few Greeks that don't want you to stay open. I said, why? Well, and I found out that Christopher applied for a charter 5 years before me, and they turned him down. They wouldn't give him one. But they gave me one, and he was jealous of that. He was real mad about it. He said, what the heck are you doing with the charter? He says, I applied for 5 years ago, and I couldn't get one through my lawyer. I said, well, I did. I said, so that's too tough for you, you know. So anyway, when he told me he put the padlock on my door and made me come all the way back from Toronto to Calgary, and the next day, I was so mad. I took him outside. I put an arm lock on him. I took him outside, and I says, you know, for 5 cents, I'd like to smash your face in for what you did to me. You closed my club down, the Calgary Greek Club down. You have the worst nerve I've ever seen in anybody. So anyway, his dad, Christopher's dad, was there. And then I found out that Christopher's dad was having poker games in his house and charging rake off. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that made me even more mad, you know. Anyway, a police car was driving by, and they said I was pretty disgruntled. And they got out of the car. I think I had a hold of them. And they said, what's going on here? I said, well, I'm just about to beat this man to death. I said, I'm so mad at him. So you better back off. So I backed off. And he had the nerve to say, to take one of the policemen downstairs. I had to show him my charter license that was hanging on my office wall. This Christopher guy says, he's got no business running this club. And I said, why? Because you didn't get your license and I did? And he swore up and down that I had, that he was within his right to put the padlock. I says, I should charge you for breaking and entering. He says, well, I haven't been in your club. I says, well, you come down that hall, those stairs in the hallway to come down to my club. You're coming into my premises. And I says, you're lucky I don't charge you. So I asked the police officer, could I charge you? He says, yeah, you could. So I didn't charge him anyway. I didn't want any more problem. And I warned him, I said, don't you ever come near me again because I'll kill you. I was so mad. You know, I had spent more money to come back. I didn't go back to Toronto. So that was the story of the Greek Club.
What happened to it?
Basil had a partner, and he says, Al, I'll give you, they got me in the office, this is after we were open for about 3 years. They said, I tell you what, Nestor's willing to put up $40,000 for the club. So we made arrangements.
Why did you sell it?
For $40,000, it was only worth about, well, I was paying $500 a month rent there, the same, because I was paying it the
You're making a living there, though, weren't you? Or had it gone downhill?
It had gone down a bit. And there was a lot of Jewish people coming down there, and the Greeks were a little hot about that. But we had a nice time there. We had a Greek night, you know, dancing girls, and a lot of the wives came down, and I was getting some complaints from the wives too that they didn't like the idea that their husband was playing poker, and I could understand that.
So you got out. Then what did you do?
From there, I went to work for Moat & Moore pharmaceutical company, and I worked for them for 4 years, calling on doctors, detailing the doctors, calling on pharmacies and hospitals. And then Bill Telfer, a friend of, well, he wasn't a friend of mine at the time, but he's a friend of mine now. He owned Yeah, he owned Moat and Moore. He sent his sales manager, general sales manager out, and he hired me. He interviewed me here in Calgary and hired me. I worked for 4 years. Then Bill Telfer sold Moat and Moore out to the shearing company, which is a big pharmaceutical company because of their manufacturing facilities. And Bill started another company. Bill Telfer started another company called not New Farm, Neo Lab Incorporated. So Bill says, "Are you happy with Moat and Moore?" I says, "Well, not since you've sold it." I said, "It's different." He said, "Well, why don't you come and work for me?" So he phoned me up. He says, "Come out and I'll pay your airfare and you can stay with me for a week." He lived in a beautiful home out in just north of Montreal, about 100 miles north. I forget the name, something Heights. So I went out there, stayed with him for a week, and he trained me as to what products he had. I came back to Calgary and I started working for him. I was with him for 3 years. Then his company was kind of falling with their products, and I wasn't doing a real good job for them. And I knew it, you know. And I told Bill, I said, "Your products, I can't get them across. They were injectables and hard to sell to the doctors, you know." I had a few doctors writing all of his products, but it wasn't that enough. So I was sitting in the Four Seasons Hotel in the lobby one day, and I met the president from Stanley Drug Products, which was located in Vancouver. And he says, "Do you know Nova Farm, which is our sister company, has an opening? Do you want me to get a hold of the president, Leslie Dan, and tell him that you're eligible?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be interesting." So anyway, Leslie Dan came out. I met him at the airport. He stayed at the Four Seasons Hotel. And up in his room, he said, "I'd like to hire you." And I said, "Well, what's my pay remuneration?" He said, "Well, I can't give you too much because you're just starting." And I said, "Well, I've had experience in detailing doctors and calling on pharmacies and hospitals." I said, "Name me a price." So he said, "Well, how would $15,000 a year?" That would be in 1982, I think. And I said, "Well, no." I said, "I'm really not interested in that kind of money. I'd have to be getting at least $25,000 a year." "Oh no, I can't pay that much." I said, "Well, take it or leave it, you know, so to speak." So anyway, this fellow from Stanley Drug, the manager, the general manager, who was a sister company, like I mentioned, with Nova Farm, he phoned me and wanted to know how I made out with Leslie. So I said, "Well, you didn't offer me enough money." I said, I couldn't take that kind of money because I'm making more than that now. He says, "Well, why don't you phone Leslie and tell him that you would be your sales manager for Western Canada? And he'll go along with that, I'm quite sure, because of your experience." So anyway, to make a long story short, I phoned Leslie the next day, and I said, "You know, I'd be interested in being your general sales manager. And I understand you let your sales manager go who was stationed in Vancouver. You let him go because of his alcoholism. He was a drunk. So Leslie says, "Well, let me think about it and I'll call you back." So he phoned me back and offered me the $25,000 a year as general sales manager, give me Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. So I said, I'm going to stay in Calgary because I've got my home here now. So anyway, he came out and got me started working for. So I worked for them for 10 years. Then I retired from Nova Farm. And while I was with Nova Farm, a man by the name of Laurie Gauthier phoned me, and he was working for Merck Frost Pharmaceuticals. And he says, I'm tired of my job. He says, is there any money in generics? I'd like to go into generic manufacturing. He says, you got $10 million? No, I don't. He says, I could borrow $100,000 from my father-in-law. So I said, well, that's not enough. I said, to go into generic research, at least 10 million. I said, he said, oh, that's unheard of. So anyway, I started doing deliveries for a few, like I got to know the pharmacists real good, and I went to attend pharmacists, and I started doing deliveries for them. I was charging $4 a delivery, and I was going all over town. Then I met Laurie Gauthier about 2 years later. I was in a drugstore picking up a delivery, and he happened to be in there talking to the pharmacist. And he said, let's go and have a coffee. So I went and had a coffee. He says, I'm going in the drug wholesale business. Would you like to join me? I said, well, tell me what you got. So we sat down, and we sat down together. And he started telling me he was going to open up a warehouse, and he was going to supply and put in competition with Northwest Drug Company and Metis Drug Company. He was going into competition with them. So I started working for him about a week later, and what I had to do is I had to go and get members. You had to be a member, because we had a co-op, and you had to be a member of the co-op, which was a $100 membership fee, and that entitled you to buy from Prairie Supply. What happened was I went out and I called, just stayed in Calgary here, and I called on about, the first week I called on 12 pharmacists. I got one member. The next day I think I was eight calls I made, I got one member. So a month later, Laurie says, Al, we can't operate. I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy and close the firm down. He says, you only took in $40,000 this month. So I said, well, that's too bad. So anyway, he was having a board of directors meeting about a month later at the Delta Hotel here. And he phoned me and he said, come on, have our dinner with us. Bring Rita and come down and have dinner. Well, Rita didn't come as usual. And went down and had this dinner. And while we were sitting there, he said, do you want to come back to work for me? And I said, why? He said, well, I think if you really put a lot of effort into this and really, really go after these pharmacists, I think they'll join. I said, all right, I'll give it another try.
Were you working at the time?
No, I was out of a job. So anyway, I went back to work with him the next day, and I hit it lucky. I got 3 customers that day at $100 a piece. And then the next day I got 2. So the second month, the first month I was there, we did $160,000 business. He says, well, that's getting a little better. He says, it's not what I want, but he said, it's getting better. So I thought, well, I'll start going out of town. And this is where I got lucky. I can't remember, but I must have got half a dozen members the next day going down to Medicine Hat. In Medicine Hat, I picked up 5 customers.
These are doctors you're going back to that you know have a
No, not
relationship.
doctors, pharmacists.
Pharmacists
I'm
that you
getting
have a relationship
Yeah,
with.
they all knew me.
Sure.
But I used to get along with all the pharmacists. I never had an enemy in the world, and the doctors. So anyway, Laurie says to me about the 3rd month, he says, geez, we went up to 350,000. He says, keep it up, Al. And I was working sometimes 10 o'clock at night. Calling on pharmacies at 9 o'clock, 9:30, quarter to 10. And, come on, sign up. It's a good deal. We'll give you. You get 13% less than you're buying from the other wholesales. Well, it was a cinch. It was easy. So I was with Laurie for 8 years.
How did he pay you?
Very weakly.
Did you get a commission for every doctor you brought
No.
in? Or pharmacist?
No. I got very low pay, but I'll say about one thing about Laurie. When I lost my leg in last May, or a year ago May, he paid me for the whole year salary. I got a check every 2 weeks from him, and he says it's not your fault you lost your leg, and he says Mom complains about the fact that he hasn't paid me up even today, but he did buy me a $7,700 wheelchair. So that's about the story of my life. Except, you don't want to hear about me going in the hospital.
No, I don't want to hear much about that leg.
So that's the story of my life.
Yeah. Well, what are you most proud of?
Brett?
What are you most proud of in your life?
My children. My 2 sons and my 3 daughters. Who grew up to be, not criminals, and, good living family people, good parents. That's what I'm proud of.
What regrets do you have?
That I didn't go into medicine and become a doctor. I think if I was come back to life and be reincarnated, that's what I'd go after, really hard. So those are my regrets, and that's what I'm proud of. My father had 18 brothers and sisters, big family, like a lot of European families are.
Where? In what part of Greece?
In a little town called Kivisia, about 13 kilometers from Athens. It was a beautiful little city, so from what my dad tells me.
So what did he do?
My dad,
No, your grandfather.
my grandfather, I don't know. I never met my grandfather, or my dad never talked about his mother and dad.
Wasn't he a blacksmith?
Right?
Wasn't he a blacksmith?
Oh, that was my mother's father. My dad had a brother in Greece and 2 or 3 cousins in the United States, first cousins, which one was a lawyer, a district attorney. His name was Roger Ravazzos. That was my dad's cousin's name. My dad had a sister called Esmeralda and a brother George, who was living when I was a young man. Everybody died. They all died from the flu, or I don't know. They had a disease, and it wiped them all out. That's what my dad tells me. That's all I can tell you about.
What brought him here?
He was an immigrant coming in to do. He landed in New York.
You went through Ellis Island?
He went to Ellis Island. He joined.
How old was he?
He was. He'd be about 17 years old. He drove a milk truck in New York City. A milk truck. He drove a taxi cab in New York. And then he saved his money and went to the New York Conservatory of Music and studied violin. My dad played a beautiful violin. I mean, he was a concert violinist, my dad. Then he joined his own, like I said earlier. He formed a sextet, I can tell you the names of them. It was
That's all right.
Bill Martin, a drummer, and anyway.
And what about your mother?
Okay, my mother's.
Where was she born?
My mother was born in a little town called Pinerolo, Italy, which is close to Turin in Italy, northern Italy. She was born in 1905. Her mother's name was Magdalena, and her father's name was Alexander. She came to. She moved. They moved from Italy to California. My grandfather was a railway engineer for the Santa Fe Railway. I never asked him what route he had, but they were running from, say, California, San Francisco to LA or something.
Did you meet them?
Yep. Then
Where did they live when you met them?
they lived in Huntington Park, just outside of Los Angeles.
What was their names?
Ferrari.
His and her name were.
I'm sorry?
What was his name? First name.
Alexander.
And the mother?
Magdalena.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. Something went wrong with the union or something there, I don't know, with the railway. And there was a position open for the CPR railway here in Calgary. So my grandfather saw that ad in the paper and applied for it. And they asked him to come up here, and he came. Then he went back to California. He brought his family up here. He brought 5 girls and 2 boys. So there was 7 in the family. They moved over in Bridgeland, 431 3rd Avenue Northeast. He bought a house, and he moved the 5 kids. My mother went to school in Calgary. She went to Central High School, and I guess the rest of her sisters and her 2 brothers were. My mother was the second oldest in the family, except the 2 boys were older. She was the second oldest of the 5 girls. So my mother went here, and then, see, my mother's sister Violet married George Andrews, who was an uncle by marriage to me. He was a hotel owner. He owned the Cascade Hotel in Banff, which is right on the main drag there. And my mother like I mentioned earlier, that's where my mother met my father in Banff. She used to go over there and work as a waitress in the summertime between school, holidays. Anyway, getting back to my grandfather, he worked on the railway, I think, till 1938, as my mom tells me, and then he retired, and he opened up a blacksmith shop in the back of his house, and he made horses' bits, but he made iron railings and iron fences, with the fancy leaves and roses and that. That's what he did his living, made his living with. He was a very comical old man. He died at 70. Teresa, my aunt, my mother's younger sister, she did a bad thing by putting him in a nursing home, and her and her husband were living in my grandfather's house, and put him out in Gleason in a nursing home, and he died there. But he was crying every day, so I understand. He was very sad because he wanted to be near his family, and he died there. And my grandmother fell and broke her leg, never healed, got gangrenous, and she lost her leg, like I did, and she died right after that. And he lived on.
Tell me about how did Grandpa, your father, come to know Sammy Davis Sr.?
Well, he just from the Cave Cabaret.
Tell me about that. What was that?
Well, the Will Masson Trio, in which Sammy Davis Jr. as his father and his uncle, they were a trio, and it was called the Will Masson Trio. And Sammy Davis was part of it. And my dad was very friendly with the band that owned the Cave Cabaret, which
Where was that?
Vancouver, right across the street from where we lived. The big cabaret was like a cave. All the inside was a cave. It was a balcony. A very unique design. And they played there. They were there for 2 weeks, and that's where George, my brother, got to know Sammy Davis. And my dad knew Max King, the owner of the Cave Cabaret, and he used to go over there, and they used to talk together and sit in the office and gab there during operation. So I guess Sammy and his uncle and dad used to come in there to do their shows. They did 2 shows a night, one at 8 and one at 11. And I guess my dad got to know Sammy Davis that way.
How old was he?
Who, my dad?
Sammy Davis, Jr.
Oh, he was quite young. He was, I'd say he was in his 20s. I don't know exactly, but he was no older than 30. About 25, I guess. A young man. George and him became very good, close buddies.
What did they do together?
They'd go out after the last show. They'd go down to Chinatown, or they'd go to another nightclub, which was only about 2 blocks away, or they'd just visit. He was staying in the Devonshire Hotel with his uncle and his dad. And I know I'd phone George to find out where he is. He'd be there in the room with them. So that's the Sammy Davis Jr. story.
And they lost contact for years and years?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. Sammy Davis was playing at a big night spot in Toronto, and George knew he was coming. So George went down, and they practically stayed with each other. You know, they were joking around in the lobby and pulling stunts and kibitzing around. And then George went down to Las Vegas, and Sammy Davis was playing at the Caesars Palace.
When he was in Toronto, this was many years ago. How many years ago?
Oh,
19 what?
50s. Yeah, it would be in the 50s.
Then in the 70s. So they weren't in touch for a number of years.
No, it wasn't in the 70s. It would be in the 50s.
No, when he went down to Las Vegas now, that's in the 70s.
Oh yeah, George probably went down there sometime in the 70s. I don't know what year. Anyway, George gives the maitre d' $100, and he says, "I understand Sammy Davis is playing here at Caesar's Palace. Will you take me to his dressing room? Here's $100." Takes him down. George is standing outside the dressing room, and Sammy Davis opens the door, and he's got a towel around his neck. George is explaining it to me. And he sees George, and he recognizes him, and he says, "Hey!" And then he stops, and he says to George, "Hold it. I'm too big for you." And walked right away from him. And he said, as he walked away from me, he grabbed this Negro woman, young girl, and gave her a big hug and a kiss, and George wasn't even there. George was very broken up about that. He said, "I'm too big for you." So my thought was, that wasn't very nice. At least he could have recognized him and greeted him, in a civil way.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
James?
So you met your grandma on your mother's side then?
Oh yeah, she was a little short, tiny lady, very slight, very delicate looking, if I can describe her that way. And she was very friendly. She didn't speak very good English. She spoke mostly Italian. And I was working at the Bay. I came up here in 1947. I remember that year. And I stayed for 2 weeks. I came up from Vancouver, and I was working at the Hudson Bay in the shoe department as a sales clerk. And I got a job for just 2 weeks. I told them I was only going to work for 2 weeks. And they said, "It's fine. We need help bad." So I'd come home for lunch because it wasn't very far from the Bay to where they lived in Bridgeland. And my grandmother used to say to me, "Come on, mangia, eat. You don't want something to eat?" So she'd make me a big plate of spaghetti, or real fast, and sauce. She had it all made, and she was worried about I was hungry. Eat, like my mother was. You got to eat something. And I know I used to take Tina and Diana up to my mother's house, and that was she'd empty the fridge on the table, you know, pickles and sardines and anything they could eat, she put on the table for them. She did that every time.
How old was she how old were you when she died?
Well, I'll give you an about year. I was about 50, 52, 53.
No, when your grandma died.
Well, my grandma died. I didn't have a grandma.
Your mother's grandma. Your mother's mother.
Oh, she was about 70.
And so you were how old?
Oh. How old would I be?
Were you a boy?
Huh?
Were you a young boy?
No, I was, I'd be about 20 years old, 21, 22.
When we have no photographs of your grandma's mother?
Your mother threw them out. When my mom died, I had a picture of me when I was a baby. I had pictures of my grandfather and my grandmother and my mother and dad. And Rita grabbed them and threw them in the garbage, the whole thing. And like your mother throws a lot of my stuff out. He gives my photographs away.
Not good.
What?
Throwing those out.
Oh, she did. I had a lot of pictures of my grandparents.
So we don't have one surviving photo.
No. I had a picture of my grandmother and grandfather. I had at least a dozen of them. You know, whether we were on a picnic or. And I said to your mom, "What did you do with all those pictures that my mother left me?" She said, "I threw them out." Your mother doesn't. She doesn't believe in pictures. She doesn't believe in pictures.
Do you know anything about your great-grandparents at all?
No, I wouldn't have a clue.
Whether it be on your mother's or your dad's side?
My dad's side. Never met them.
Do you have any surviving aunts or uncles?
I got one surviving cousin that took. See that house that my grandmother and grandfather had here in Calgary? Karen, my cousin, her mother, told me when I was visiting them in Vancouver. Karen, I got a surviving cousin, Karen. We were having dinner one night, and the way it was to go is if my mother died first, Lucille, my mother's sister, would get the house that my grandfather's owned. And she said, Lucille said to me in front of Karen and her husband, "Your mother died before me and Karen gets the house. But I'm going to change all that." And this is all verbal. She said, if your mother dies first and I die after her, then the will be probated so that you and Karen split whatever you sell the house for. And they sold the house for $100,000. Exactly. Karen, I arranged for Karen to get a lawyer to look after the probate and take Tony, which was Teresa's husband, if you follow me. They were living in that house and they had no right living in that house. Because they were living there, they figured they would. So Karen took Tony, her husband, Karen took Tony, Teresa's husband, and Teresa had died, my mother had died, Lucille had died, and it was up to Karen and I to split that house. So after going to court, Karen won the case, and she sent me $1,000. And I've never talked to her since because that was a rotten thing to do. After her mother, only verbally, telling me, if your mother and I die apart from each other, you and Karen are to split that house. You know, but that wasn't the understanding. That wasn't what was in writing. So Karen took advantage of me. She went over against her mother's word, telling me I could split the house with her. She took the whole thing, and I had no say about it.
That's the only cousin you have that you know about that's alive?
Yeah, well, I've got several second cousins. I got a cousin who's living in. He's not too far from me, Berkeley. His name is Dr. Constantine Ferrari, and he's doing research there.
Any relationship to the Ferrari cars?
My mother says they were, but I kind of doubt it. My mother says they were distant relatives of ours, the Ferrari family.
Well, probably.
Well, it could be, I don't know. I kind of doubt it.
All right, let's wrap it.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Dad. You've been a great audience.
Thank you.
You've been a great guest on our show, Peter and James Talk Show.
What is this?